Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahawashi, Ba'ashem Lakakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. Excuse me. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about self-denial, what it is, and something that Yahawashi did. Him being our example of how to conduct ourselves, right? Because Jake doesn't have essentially a righteous template of how to conduct themselves amongst each other, right? So Yahawashi given us that example, right, in terms of self-denial and essentially having that sort of mindset, towards one another, because Jake doesn't have, like I said before, they don't have that in terms of they don't have a proper, I don't want to say a role model, but they don't have a proper figure to essentially model themselves after, because when you look at the people who have status, who have money, who have, they can sing very well, they can act very well, or they play sports very good, they might be very talented, but it doesn't mean that they're very righteous. These people are very, what's it called? A lot of them, essentially they lead our people astray. The scriptures say the leaders of the people cause them to err, because they show the people, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, you Israelites, in terms of they lead you down a ditch, right? They lead you towards death. They lead you towards destruction, right? So, but as a matter of fact, let me get this definition here, and it says self-denial is the denial of one's own interests and needs. It says self-sacrifice. It says self-denial is an act of letting go of the self, as with altruistic abstinence, the willingness to forego personal pleasures and undergo personal trials in pursuit of increased good of another, right? So, it's essentially, you don't, because we get, when we come to this understanding, we know that there's a difference between, there's a flesh and the spirit, and Paul even talks about this too. He says that I am carnal, right? But there are things that you want to do that's good, right? But it's always a tug, so to speak. And the Apostle Paul is a good example of this, because he goes into this a lot as well. But I kind of wanted to read a little something about what Yahawashi did in terms of, kind of like essentially giving us an example of how to conduct ourselves amongst each other, because Jake doesn't have that example of how to conduct themselves, right? Right? Because you can be, either of us, including myself, can be and have been, or probably will be, in situations where it requires a sentiment of putting yourself last. There are not going to be moments where it feels good, but as the scriptures say, it yieldeth a peaceable fruit of righteousness, right? So, it's not something to be offended by, but rather, if you're spiritual and remain in the spirit, it can be something to yield good fruit. Like a scripture say, that's also that tree is known by its fruits. When you go into that word fruits, it refers to works. The Greek word there is karpos in Matthew the 7th chapter. It refers to works, deeds, behaviors, so on and so forth, right? So where was I gonna go? Okay, John, right? So let's see. Okay, this is John chapter 13. Okay, I'll start at verse 5 and I might just jump around, because I don't want to make the lesson too long, right? But it says, Yahawashi washing the disciples' feet, and it says, after he poureth water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with a towel wherewith he was girded. Then come he to Simon Peter, and Peter said unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Yahawashi answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know thereafter. Peter said unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Yahawashi answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. So there's a bit of a back and forth right here, right? But it says, verse 9, Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, not my feet, but also my hands and my head. Yahawashi saith unto him, to him, excuse me, he that is washed needeth not to save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. Right? So verse 11, it says, For ye know who should betray him. Excuse me, sorry. It says, For he knew who should betray him. Therefore said he, ye are not all clean. Right? So after he washed their feet and had taken his garments and was set down again, and he said unto him, Know ye not what I have done for you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, Well, for so I am. If then you, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash another's feet. For I have given you an example of how ye should do, as I have done, excuse me, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say to you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither is he that is greater than he that sent him. Right? So Yahawashi is giving disciples here an example of how to conduct ourselves. Right? So I'm reading this to show that you can be easily, either one of us can be in a situation where you may not necessarily have to wash another brother's feet, but and I mean that in a literal terms, but you might have to do it spiritually also, right? So it's just a manner of conduct, because Jake doesn't have that understanding. Going back to the point I was making earlier, they don't have that that righteous template on how to model themselves amongst themselves, right? We know, again, with the curses and all so on and so forth, that the our people, especially the Israelite man, has a strong evil eye towards their own brethren. There is a lot of problems within our, I don't want to say, I hate to say the word community. I'll just say the nation as a whole, right? Because Jake essentially, they oppress one another. Another thing, I remember there was a Jake I was working with, and he was telling me about some show called Snowfall. And I haven't seen the show, but I've seen snippets of it. But pretty much, he from what I've been told, the main character, he starts to make a lot of money, distributing drugs and all that, but he starts to even destroy, and oppress, like, his own people, right? So the point really is, going back to a righteous template, our people don't have a righteous example of how to model themselves, amongst themselves. They have templates such as Tupac, Biggie, uh, 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 Diddy, Jay-Z, you know, these are the people, right? These are the people they look to in terms of guidance, instruction, um, how to model themselves, how to, how to conduct themselves amongst themselves, right? And these people, like the scriptures talk about how, the blind leadeth the blind. Like these people are blinded and these people are wicked, right? So the point is that, amongst ourselves, you'll be in situations where it's you would have to wash another brother's feet, right? And I mean that, in a figurative sense, right? So in that sense, it's seeing Yahawashi, in your brethren, right? Because it sometimes, and it can be especially coming out of Babylon the Great, that type of culture where essentially you kind of have like a more of a lone wolf type of spirit. You kind of have more of a dog eat dog type of spirit. It Babylon the Great promotes a sentiment of individualism. It promotes a sentiment of, I can do bad by myself. Like, no, that's earthly. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, individualism is one of the tenets of Satanism, right? When you go into, I forgot the guy's name, McVeigh, is it Anton McVeigh or something like that? When you go into his Church of Satan, one of the things that they preach and they brag about is an individualism, right? So that's not a healthy type of mindset to have. Like of course we need Yahweh Bashim Yahawashi, but it's better off to have somebody in your corner who is essentially in accordance and have the same vibration with you, right? Right. This is the vibration of pretty much as the as our people take on in Babylon the Great, take on being in the captivity where they're scattered. This is James 3. Verse 14. And it says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be arrogant, and as a result be in defiance of the truth. This superficial wisdom is not that which comes from above, but is earthly, natural, unspiritual, even demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder, unrest, rebellion, and every evil thing and morally degrading practice," right? So, all these different, and I read this to show that, the mindset that a lot of our people have, especially without actually practicing and implementing Yahawashi, that is the vibration that they come in. They come in a sentiment that's very earthly. Our people don't have that natural, even being mingled amongst the heathen, and learning of their ways. One of the things as a people we've taken on is these sorts of sentiments, because we're not naturally like this as a people. We're supposed to be a noble people above all these other nations. But being mingled amongst these heathens, one of the things we've taken on is the vibration of how they conduct themselves, especially Esau Edom, because this guy won't blink twice about deleting a bunch of his own people, and as well as Israelites also, right? So, and then like the scriptures talk about how the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the ways of wicked seduceth them, right? It's not just like in the practices, but like in etiquette also. At etiquette, our people don't have that because we stray so far away from the Heavenly Father, right? Okay, let me go back to the example. Where is it? John. Let me see if there was any more there. Okay, I just read verse 16 again, and it says, Verily, verily, I say unto you, Yahawashi speaking, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he is that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye if ye do them, right? So, implementing these things is very, very useful, because it actually brings us back to an understanding of how we used to actually be, proper Israelite culture. We're not a bunch of degenerate plants of a strange vine, right? All of that is part of, actually building up and actually mending the bridges, right? And Yahawashi is the example. That's why Yahawashi is very, very worthy of all praises, glory, and honor, because, a lot of these people, when you think about the nature and think about how people behave in the world, you know, without Yahawashi in the midst, without Yahawashi, you know, it's Jake can't come together. Let's just put it. Let's be frank and be honest. Jake will never ever come together unless Yahweh Shai is in the midst, right? They would never will, because they would always have some sentiment of nationalism, colorism, um, you know, they would you just have all these various facets of different division amongst them, and the elect won't have all these different divisions, because they're going to be unified in that name. That's why the name is super super important. The scriptures say that the elect shall praise his holy name, right? So that name is very very important, and the reputation that actually comes behind that, because a name also carries a certain reputation. There is no reputation in being black. There's no positive reputation in being so-called Hispanic or Native American. There's no reputation in any of these things. But Yahweh Bashim Shai has got a reputation. And the scriptures say that a good name endureth forever, right? So if people don't come under that vibration, then there's no going to be unified. The Judah would always vex Ephraim, and Ephraim would always vex Judah. I'm just speaking about our people who are in gross darkness, right? Let me go to Sirach. As a matter of fact, I'll go to Matthew first. Matthew 20, is it 22? I'll start at verse 35, and it says, And then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, saying, Master, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Yahawashi said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and all thy mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. The second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy brother as thyself. These two commandments hang all the law and the prophets, right? So this is why Yahawashi also deserves to be praised, because when you think about it, you can't keep all the laws 100%. It's impossible, right? But showing that reverence, that altruistic mindset towards one another, all these things are counted for righteousness. Because when you think about it, a lot of us, something as simple as trying to get unmixed fabrics, it's very very difficult because we're in captivity. But the point is, Yahawashi, he even said it himself. He said, take my yoke, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light, right? This is Sirach 29 and 11, and it says, lay up thy treasure according to the commandments of the Most High, and it shall bring thee more profit than gold. Shut up alms in thy storehouses, and it shall deliver thee from all affliction. It shall fight for thee against thine enemies, better than a mighty shield and a strong spear, right? So, having that sort of the self-denial mindset, because when you think about it, we don't have, physical treasures to deliver us out of trouble, right? When you see the way the world's going, they're gonna phase out, and make everything digital. and we're going to need a defense. We're going to need intervention. We're going to need a lawyer, to intervene for us, right? This is another reason, and shows you that, we need divine intervention in times to come, right? And the Lord can easily remember us, for implementing this altruistic, mindset, how we conduct ourselves amongst each other, right? So, as a matter of fact, that was pretty much it. Let's bear with me on this. Okay, this is Colossians 3, verse 12, and it says, "Put on, therefore, as the elect of the Most High, holy and beloved, bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, and long suffering." Right? So there might be moments where you have to actually implement, certain, kind of subject yourself, so to speak, right? For another, right? And that's okay. It's okay as long as you're spiritual. Realizing it's all yielding good, peaceable fruit of righteousness, right? That sort of suffering is acceptable in the eyes of the Lord, right? You're not suffering as an evildoer, right? And that's another thing also a lot of our people don't understand. You can suffer in a righteous sense, but you can also suffer in a wicked sense, right? And the majority of our people suffer when it comes to in a wicked sense. So here is verse 13, and it says, "Forbearing one another, forgiving one another, and if any man have a quarrel against any, even Hamashiach Yahawashi forgave you, so do ye." Right? So it implements a sentiment of character of how to conduct ourselves amongst each other. And as a people, we've lost a lot of character, our sentiment of nobility, and a lot of this is it trickles down into actually being a noble, holy people, right? Because the nations are supposed to look to us as an example of how to conduct ourselves. But when people think about, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans today, the nations ain't gonna say anything good. They might say you're talented, and that's about it. But in terms of like being an example of how you're supposed to be, no, man, the nations were a laughing stock, right? Because we turned our backs upon the Lord, right? So coming back to the ways of our forefathers, coming back to our culture, it brings a sentiment of being properly cultivated. With the dead leaves are being trimmed off. Those old twigs, they've been taken away. Becoming, righteous plants in the eyes of the Lord, right? But the Lord is going to purge away 2/3 of His vineyard, right? Because it's unprofitable. But that's pretty much it. Because Yahawashi, he's the example, he's the benchmark, and with Yahawashi, it takes away that vexation, between Judah and between Ephraim, right? That vexation no longer exists. That colorism shit no longer exists. All that or I'm this, I'm light skin, dark skin, all that crap goes away, man. Because we have an example, right, of how to actually be and conduct ourselves amongst each other. Anyways, I'll leave it there. But Lord's wills, brothers, you brothers and few sisters were edified. Just like to give all praises, glory and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahawashi. Until next time, I say Shalom.